Mobile hunters, are you looking for a lightweight, comfortable system to hunt out of this season? If you said yes, you should be checking out the tethered Phantom saddle. And you might be saying, Clint, how is this thing so comfortable? Well, let me tell you how. Comfort channels, check. The comfort channels allows simple one-handed adjustment for leaning trees, gives you full control where you need it most. If you need it in your lower back, you slot into the low comfort channel. If you need it up in your lower back, or I'm sorry, under your rear end, then you slot it into the low comfort channel. Utilibridge, check. You might be saying, hey, what is a Utilibridge? This is a one-hand adjust on the fly bridge system that allows you to kind of find that hunting sweet spot no matter where you hang your tether. Lineman loops, check. You might be saying lineman loops, whatever, overrated, right? Wrong. Lineman loops, a little bit more rigid to where you can easily find them in the dark. I don't know how many times I spent time trying to get my carabiner to clip into my lineman's loop and just wishing it was just a little bit more sturdy. The Phantom saddle has you covered there as well. Made in America, 100%. And if that wasn't enough, they just recently came out with the Predator XL platform. This platform is 40% bigger and has improved traction over the current Predator. I hunt out of the current Predator, a little smaller profile. But if you're one of those fellows that's got some big feet, some big boots, you might want to check out the Predator XL. So if you want to learn more about Tethered and all their products, head to tetherednation.com. The first thing I do in the morning before a hunt, before a scout, or just before getting ready for work is have my morning coffee, and I'm sure most of you out there listening are the same. Make sure you're filling your mug with Skull Brew coffee, as it is the only coffee company that is both 2% for conservation certified and donates 10% of its profits to conservation organizations to help secure the future of our wild places. So head to skullbrewcoffee.com and choose between 3 killer roasts of coffee and know that you are supporting conservation with every sip. Welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 188. Today we crank through another session of the Hunting Beast listener Q&A mini-series with Dan Infalt, and today is part 2 of reading maps in Topo, so stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hump day. Almost making it through yet another week, drawing 1 week closer to whitetail season. For those of you that are going to get ready to head out west, if you're hitting some of those early openers, or if you're actually headed out to do a little elk hunting or maybe a little antelope hunting. I know our buddy Johnny Utah is doing a little antelope hunting, so he's got probably just a little over a month, maybe, I think, until he heads to Montana and starts chasing some speed goats, which is something I think I need to do at some point. I don't know that I have the patience for it necessarily, but I think it'd be really cool to try and ultimately get super frustrated with it. But I'm not going to have a whole lot of updates today. I'm going to keep this kind of short because we have a podcast with Johnny Utah coming up here next week. That we'll kind of start talking about our goals, preparations, dreams, aspirations for this upcoming hunting season. And just kind of, I guess the only main update that I had for this week was I did go out and pull a couple cameras yesterday, 3 of them, and truthfully, it was a little bit of a bust. It seems like, I've mentioned this in the past. A lot of the places that I'm hunting and stuff like that. I don't have a destination food source in which, I'm going to get a bunch of velvet pictures. It's just not the way things are set up. The public that I'm hunting isn't surrounded by a bunch of agriculture. So, I'm really still relying on those kind of community scrape areas that were well defined, and maybe they're still hitting licking branches, which, I've said in the past that I have evidence that they're still hitting some of these licking branches and so forth. And that was where I placed some of these other cameras. So I'm getting deer traffic, so they're in the right place to see deer movement. I'm just not catching a lot of mature bucks except on one camera, which I pulled, and I think I mentioned in the previous podcast. So I got a ton of doe traffic. And in some of these places, I set up some mock scrapes, and they're actually hitting those and checking out those licking branches and so forth. Started using a little bit more of a Jeff Sturgis method, maybe is one way to say it, of using some type of vine. I've been starting to implement that a little bit, just to kind of sweeten the spot a little bit more and make it really obvious that they want to, that they want to rub their face or their preorbital glands or whatever on that. It gives it a little bit of weight versus a rope. they're able to kind of push against. So I've seen some success with that at this point. At least they're communicating and using it, but it's been predominantly does and younger bucks, with the exception of that one group that I had seen, a couple weeks ago. I think it was early June is when those images were from. But and the one camera, I hung it, and I must not have been paying attention when I was looking at the viewfinder whenever I set it up, because I had it set up, kind of on a steep angle. So I was really having to point it pretty far, down to get the image. And I was getting, some deer, but I was getting a lot of the tops of their backs. So that was a fail on my part, that I just didn't pay enough attention whenever I was setting that camera up. Or it may have moved, because I usually set my bag out in front of it. So I can make sure I can see the bag in the window, and if I can see the bag, then I know I'll be able to see the deer. And so I'm not sure if when I left, maybe the stick that I was using to help point it down, I don't know, maybe it shifted. But I did get some images on that, but a lot of them were does, and then there were some deer I was just missing completely, where I was seeing the tops of their backs and just wasn't getting a good look at their head, and that was a lot of those pictures. So I made some of those adjustments yesterday, and then started working on the trailer a little bit, and got the solar panel actually installed yesterday. Ran all the cabling, so the solar generator is in, the panel is on the roof, and it is outside charging as we speak. And then I think the only thing that's really left to do that are major is I need to put a window in, and I need to put the floor in. And once those two things are done, it'd be some small things like putting a toolbox on the front and getting some scissor lifts or some scissor jacks to stabilize it whenever I park it. So a few odds and ends like that, but I really only have probably two. I got to put a shelf in too. So I really only have like two major projects left to do. So I'm probably going to go out and do some of that after I'm done recording this in the ridiculously hot summer heat. It's supposed to be like 97 degrees today. But I do want to get jumped into this podcast. Cool episode today. Part number 2 of Reading Maps and Topo with Dan Infalt. But before I do that, I want to do just a little bit of housekeeping here and let you guys know that our buddies at Exodus are kicking off their Velvet Fest campaign that they do annually. And if you're not familiar with what hashtag Velvet Fest is, it's the official start to deer season, and Exodus is helping us get the ball rolling for everyone's summer scouting. I know for me, at least, whenever Velvet Fest hits, it means that it's time to make sure my cameras are out, or for me, in some instances, it's time to start kind of checking some of those cameras. Just at minimum, you want to make sure that they're deployed so you start getting some of those Velvet pictures. So this will be running from July 31st to August 21st, and they're going to be giving away some killer prizes for people who use the hashtag Velvet Fest on social to share any of their whitetail adventures that they're taking part in during the course of the summer. Also, if you're looking for a trail camera, hashtag Velvet Fest is the perfect opportunity to get ready for this season. So every single camera, every single order comes with a random prize card that you'll have to scratch off that will reveal a prize. And since I'm buddies with those guys, I have a little bit of the drop on what those might be, and they are some killer deals. So you're going to want to make sure you take full advantage of that. But not just that, to sweeten the pot even more, each week they have a special offer along with a grand prize. So just as a teaser here, here are a few of the grand prizes they're going to be giving away each week during the Velvet Fest celebration. So the first week, they will be giving away a 2021 October archery hunt with Steve Shirk Guide Services. And if you don't know who Steve Shirk is, check out the Exodus podcast. They've had him on a couple times. The dude gets on monsters. He's from Pennsylvania. That would be a killer hunt to be on. Week 2, they are giving away a shoulder mount from Uran Taxidermy. So you want to, maybe you kill that big deer with Steve. Maybe one of your buddies wins week 2. Maybe you can swindle him into giving you his taxidermy credits. Week number 3, they're giving away a September archery hunt for this season with Wicked Obsession in Kentucky and a shoulder mount from national award-winning studio Full Draw Taxidermy. Those are some pretty killer prizes. For any order on the website during the designated week, you'll be automatically entered with any purchase on the website for the grand prize. There's a lot to this campaign, so you'll want to head over to the ExodusOutdoorGear.com and make sure you're signed up for their newsletter, because you won't want to miss out on any of these opportunities. If you're not familiar with Exodus, which I'm not sure how you couldn't be by listening to this podcast, I'll give you the quick Cliff Notes version of them. Over the last 5 years, Exodus has consistently shown that they build quality trail cameras that flat out work. And of course, they have the best trail camera warranty, period. Every single camera has a 5-year warranty and even comes with a theft and damage coverage. That's right, 5 years, literally half a decade, you'll be covered by the Exodus 5-year warranty. But more than likely, you won't need it because their cameras already are built to last. So be sure to take part in the Velvet Fest celebration, and tag me in any of your pictures as well, because I want to see what you guys are up to. All right, so this next question, I'm curious your answer on this, Dan, because I will learning a lot from the Beast Forum and from you specifically. It's like when I look at places and I'm going to scout, it's like especially in hill country, I'm looking at that top third leeward side, like that's immediately like where I start to scout and look. And this person just asked, are there situations where you're predicting that bedding is occurring in bottoms as compared to the upper 1/3?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not like hill bedding, but it's in hill terrain. All those terrains mix. I mean, understanding farm bedding helps you a lot in hill country. Mm-hmm. Understanding big woods helps you a lot in farm. They bed down low quite often. I mean, I'd probably say like maybe 5 or 10% of the time you'll find, 5 or 10% of the beds in low spots. If it's really hilly terrain, you'll find a majority on the leeward sides. But a lot of cases, they get some sort of air current activity that's very beneficial down low, too. Especially if the valleys are tight, you see a lot of low bedding. Because anytime you go near that valley, they can smell you because the wind just swirls in there like a toilet bowl.
Right.
And in those cases, they bed near a lot. And those deer can be very hard to kill. And I can remember finding a bed one time on a ridge, seeing a giant buck come out of it. And I saw him come out of there more than once. And I went in there and I looked at that bed in the off season. And I was like, why the hell would he bed here? It just didn't make sense because it was down low and the wind wasn't right. And it was a different wind the next time I saw him there. And I know one thing for sure. Mature bucks don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
They do everything for a reason. They don't put their life on the line and bed in a bad spot, a bad situation. So he has some sort of advantage. But regardless, I was scratching my head on it, and I was trying to figure out a spot to set up. And I moved around that bed looking at, there's several ways that deer came out of there. There's rub lines coming out in several ways. And when I went around that perimeter, just out of sight and sound, everywhere I stopped, if I dropped milkweed, it ended up at that bed. In a complete circle where I went up the hill, down the hill, or around.
That's crazy.
And a lot of cases, they bed in spots where we don't understand what's going on, but there's a reason. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
There's a reason they're there.
Yep.
And in a lot of cases, they bed low because of there's a lot of pressure on the hillsides. The hillsides are too open.
Mm-hmm.
They're too mature. They're not going to sit on a leeward hill if it's mature trees and you can see for 400 yards.
Right.
I mean, they're not just going to sit there like a sitting duck in the open.
Right. They need to see well enough to be able to see their back trail, but it can't be completely wide open is what you're saying, right? So stem count has
right. They want a little cover.
Yeah.
They need escape cover. They need a little bit of cover.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's no cover on the hills and there's cover down in the valley, they'll go down in the valley. If there's pressure in the hills and no pressure in the valley, they'll go down in the valley. Mm-hmm. So they'll bed in the valley kind of like farmland or something where they, they'll use back to transitions, openings, waterways, oxbows, kind of stuff like that.
Right.
But yeah, they bed different ways in different terrains too. Yeah.
You said something there that made me think. There's like a spot that I've been hunting in the past that when you said tight valleys I just wrote tight valleys equals bedding in the bottom, and you might have just unlocked something for me in this one place that I'm hunting because like it's rugged terrain, steep sides, right? And I found a little bit of bedding on the upper 1/3, but not as much as I would have thought. You know what I mean? This is big woods too, so it's a little maybe less predictable only because they have so much room to roam and it's low deer density, so there's not a ton of competition and stuff like that. I mean, that probably all plays part of it. But I'm now thinking like maybe I've been looking in the wrong spot for bedding in this particular area based on that because of these draws are deep and steep. I mean, is there... So tight, yes. Is it like, do you see it even more so whenever they're really, really steep, or is it like, more shallow ridges, or like, have you seen any kind of consistency with that?
There's different scenarios for both.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember some of the better stuff I saw where down low was in Illinois, where really the hill country is really washed out farmland. So it's steep draws down to rivers.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really hill country per se. It's washouts.
Right.
So you'd be walking and it'd be all like grass and CRP, sage grass kind of crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there'd be these cuts that go down. And I saw the same thing when I was out in Montana hunting. But you'd walk up to the edge of these things and the bucks would be down in the center of the bottom and they'd run out. You know, they're really hard to hunt because there wasn't much cover anywhere else. They're just a tangle of crap.
Mm-hmm.
But again, even though they're not at the top third, they're down at the bottom and they're in a draw, you know, drop milkweed or something that's just swirling down there. It's pulling them scent from every direction. And they can see you crest the top, you step into a thick brush, you're making noise. You know, they've got a great scenario there.
Right. Yeah, I think we mentioned it a couple times today. We mentioned it a couple times in the last, like, the wind and thermal session, where it's like, I mean, one of the things that's changed the game quite a bit for me was actually, you know, not just carrying milkweed with me while I'm hunting, but carrying milkweed with me while I'm scouting, and being able to look just at like that prevailing wind. Because let's say, for example, it's like the places that I hung cameras this past week and I've been in twice. Right, I was in it once in the winter when I scouted it originally. I was in it once whenever I set some cameras. I'll probably go in one last time in like July to check cameras, and then that'll be it until the season opens, and I'll let them sit, and then I'll basically let them for the year, right? But those three instances that I'm in there, I'll be dropping milkweed and looking at what my prevailing wind is, and taking into consideration the time of the day, and trying to get an understanding of like wind mapping that spot for each prevailing wind that I had an experience with. That way I kind of can anticipate what's happening. And so I think the next time I head into this spot, like, I need to make sure I'm checking out that bottom, because I've avoided the bottom a little bit because I've just been spending time up top, and I think I'm missing an opportunity, honestly. So you might unlock something there for me. So hopefully
there's two kinds of hunters. There's the kind that says, wow, did you see that deer come out of there? That was cool. And then there's the killer, and he's the guy that says, why did that deer come out of there? And he wants to know the answer.
Right. Yeah.
Always asking why is what puts deer on the walls.
Yeah.
You know, trying to answer that question. Why is he doing that? And don't take anything for granted that he just, you know, it was random. Because there's no such thing as random with mature bucks.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So you should always be asking that why.
Yeah. Yeah. They're the least random critter when they get to that age that you'll probably ever see, you know? So,
right.
This next question, man, is interesting. It actually made me think whenever I saw it. Like, it stumped me for like a second. I was thinking about it, and I was just really wanted to know what you kind of thought of it, because I've never thought of it this way. And what he says is, he's like, have you seen any correlation between a buck's core area, or buck core areas in general, and change in elevation? So he's like, for example, you know, say there's a 200-foot change in elevation over 2,000 acres. The buck's core area was like, I'll give you an example, 5 miles, right? And then compared to like maybe there's a 1,000-foot change in elevation over 2,000 acres, the buck's core area is now 2 miles, or whatever the case is. Have you seen any kind of like relationship to the elevation change over so many acres kind of starting to dictate how much that buck was going to move and where he was going to primarily live?
Yeah, I can't say that I have. I've seen drastic changes of sizes of core buck areas where two bucks live in the same area. Mm-hmm. I've seen one buck has 5 to 10 mile square radius where you hardly ever see him, but you see him all over the place, and the other one's tight in a little hole, and you never see him out of it. You know, right. But I can't say that I've put together a relationship with elevation. It's a good question, though. Yeah. And the guy might be onto something. Yeah. I just can't say that I can answer that.
Right. Yeah.
Personally.
I'd be curious to know, like, that would be a great question to ask, like the Penn State deer biology, department or whatever, that have a bunch of radio collared, deer, to kind of get a sense of, like, take 2 deer of a similar age, let's say, that way, like, at least like their maturity level, experience and smarts maybe is similar, that, in one area, are you seeing their range larger versus smaller, depending on like how much elevation they're having to traverse? Because I mean, if I'm just thinking about it logically, let's just entertain ourselves. I'm like thinking about it going, we know deer will take the path of least resistance, right? Especially as they get older, they become many cases set in their ways and even more kind of, consistent to or stuck to a pattern, if you will. I've heard some guys say, that, as they've seen deer mature, they're actually their bedding spots become fewer and fewer, and they actually get a smaller and smaller core area. And so if I were to take all that as truth, right, I would say then if you add in the strain of additional elevation, I would say that their core area would even be smaller than if it were flatter. Would be my thinking. Like that would be my rationale and reasoning. What do you think? Do you think that sounds like somewhat reasonable, or is it crazy talk?
I don't know. Hard to say.
You can say crazy talk. It's okay.
Crazy talk.
There we go. All right, we got just a handful more here, and then we'll be wrapped up with this one. I'm just kind of looking because we covered a lot of these already. All right, here's a good one. This I think is applicable for a lot of people. This fellow writes in and says, for people who plan to hunt out of state or new terrain or terrain types for the first time, what is the biggest learning curve, whenever you're encountering, marsh terrain hunting for this first time, or maybe stepping into hill country for the first time? So what, like for an out-of-state hunter that's traveling and they're going to maybe go, maybe the guy's from hunting the swamps in New Jersey and he's going to go to the, hill country in southern Ohio. Like what are those big learning curves for people who are going to travel out of state and do new things?
Oh, geez, that's kind of a hard question. You asked me to tell you what goes through a guy's mind when he goes into something new.
Right.
I think it all depends on a person's personality and how he adapts.
Yeah. I
mean, some people are really good at studying things, and some people just kind of jump into things and see what happens. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, I can answer on me, but I can remember when I was young and I started venturing out and trying a lot of new areas and stuff, and getting out of the old habits was the hardest thing for me.
Yeah.
I'd come from like Wisconsin and go hunt Iowa, and I'd want to get into the thickest cover in the world because of what I'm used to here in Wisconsin. And I'd be watching these bucks walk out in open fields all over the place, and I'd be like, what the hell? But it was a different terrain. It was a whole different deal. And the difference between a killer and a guy who sits trees is that the killer adapts. You're going to struggle at first, but you adapt. I can say this about it, that going out and trying new things is really good for a hunter.
Yeah.
It's good for your whole psyche and everything you do. I mean, if you just understand one terrain, like a lot of guys would be like, well, I'm a farmland hunter. I know farms inside out, and that's all I hunt. Okay, great. But I can tell you this, that I learned a hell of a lot about farm hunting when I stepped up to hill country.
Yeah.
Because I learned how much those little elevations matter. And I started seeing it like, oh, that's why those bucks are bedded on the farm like this.
Right. Yeah.
Because you didn't really notice that the 10-foot elevation made that much of a difference. But when you start comparing it to the bigger elevations, seeing what the bucks do and how they bed and when they're there in the winds, you start to think, oh, okay. And that's just that's an easy one. But there are a lot of things you learn by, getting outside of your comfort zone and trying some things.
Yeah, I'll 100% agree with you, man. Like that is, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like it's hard to give someone a stock answer of like what the biggest challenge is going to be. I think the biggest challenge for a lot of guys who are going to go out of state for the first time, especially if they're hunting public land, is the thing between their ears. Because it is, you're going to be successful, but you've got to reconcile and understand what success means on a trip like that. It's not necessarily always filling a tag, right? It's like you may come home several years with an unfilled tag until you figure out how to hunt that particular area, especially if you're not able to scout it, especially if you don't live close to it. You know what I mean? It's like if you're just going out and you're traveling several hours once a year, it's like just think about the person who hunts the example you gave, their farm, and how often they're successful on their farm, right? Like most guys who are just weekend warrior hunters, maybe they kill a buck like once every 5 years, 3 years. You know what I mean? And that's an area that they know. Now take that and like you're going somewhere completely new, unknown. You don't have a clue what deer are there. You don't really know much about the terrain, like all those things. And like instead of your odds being like 15%, which is like not even realistic, even in a good sense or in a great opportunity, like they're much lower than that. You know what I mean? Like 3%, maybe. You know what I mean? It's like that's the opportunity. Like, when I was talking to Zach the one day, he said, people think, they see these hunting shows and stuff like that, like on like the Outdoor Channel or whatever. And it's like they're killing these deer all the time and stuff like that. And he made a good point. He said, filming and hunting this year, and this would have been when did I talk to him? I talked to him like right after ATA. So it would have been like late season was just over. He said he had been part of either filming or hunting, at least at that point, 100 different hunts, right? And in those 100 hunts, I think he said he was part of 2 kills where he killed on one and another guy killed on one. And so he's like, for a guy who's in the timber for 100 days this year to only have 2 kills, he's like, that's 2% success rate for a person who's doing it every day. You know what I mean? And he's like, and so guys jump into some of these things with unrealistic expectations of like, I'm going to go for 7 days, and then they're pissed if they don't see something. It's like, hey man, you might not see shit in 7 days. You know what I mean? Like not only might you not kill anything, you may not see anything in 7 days. And I think you just have to go ahead. I'm sorry.
I've struggled with that myself. I get a lot of people nowadays. It must be something with the young people nowadays managing their time or something. But they'll tell me they've got 10 or they've got 15 days to hunt in the season. And they want to know how to have success in that 10 or 15 days. And I tell them, look at my success. So a lot of times I go 15, 30 days without seeing a deer because of the way I'm hunting. You got to put in the time. You're going to have to expect, to struggle a little bit if you're hunting like that,
Yeah. No, 100%. So John, man, I'm curious, man. I know you do some traveling out of state. You're going to be doing a fair amount of out of state hunting this year just by the nature that you move to a new area and stuff like that. How are you adapting to new places? Like, what's your approach to that?
Well, last year was my first out of state trip, and other than being in college in West Virginia, but I got to know the area, so that wasn't quite the same. But last year I went to Ohio, and it was a 4-day hunt. I met 2 of my college buddies the second day, and I spent all of the first day and first half of the second day just covering miles and seeing where the deer were. I did a lot of driving. It was an all-day scouting event, and then I did some glassing the next morning, and I ended up spooking a nice buck and went back in there the third day on the morning, and he ended up winding me. It was down in the bottom, and he made a scrape right out of sight, right from where I walked in. I ended up hitting my ground set right before he would have walked down into the bottom that I was on. And the day that I killed, I went up into an area that I was just seeing a lot of does. I didn't see any bucks up in there, but I was seeing does every time I was driving by this area. It was a little overlooked strip mine area right beside the road, and I was just frustrated because I just scared the one buck the day before. So I was like, well, I'll jump in here with all these does, and I'll just work my way along this bank, and it's about 200 yards from the road to the top of this ridge. It's all strip mine, no trees, and at the top's a big cow pasture. So I was like, I'll just work my way along here and sit in the openings for about an hour and a half, and I ended up calling when I sat down in the second spot that I sat down in, and did the whole deal, rubbed the rattling antlers against the sapling, grunted, doe bleat, rattled antlers, and this buck came running in, and ended up shooting him. That was how it ended. That was the Ohio trip.
So the lesson here is don't listen to John, because he went on his first trip and killed one.
yeah, I had one of my luckiest years I've ever had.
Right. But I mean, the reality is you went and you put in some work. Like the first thing that you said that I took away from that is like you spent like a lot of your time scouting versus hunting. And I think that's the other part
And there
people
was
have to
so
get good
many
with.
hours online scouting,
Yeah.
countless hours online.
So,
I think if I were to change it, or when I go back this next trip, I won't spend right off the bat. I won't spend as much time just walking and scouting. I'm going to do more of the freelance style that you've been putting some shows on about, and
right.
work my way and hunt my way in.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'll be the biggest thing I change.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of almost look at it as scouting and hunting at the same time, right? Now, I'm not making anything or creating anything. I mean, these are things I've picked up from guys like Dan and and stuff like that. Where it's like I've just got confident enough to start to adapt it because I started seeing success. I started increasing my encounters. I started finding new areas I probably would have overlooked in the past and stuff like that. And so, to me, it's like I think the biggest mindset change for a dude that's going to go out of state, Dan, I'd be curious what you think of this, but is that you're always hunting. Like, so don't look at scouting as like a waste of your time because you should be hunting while you're scouting. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah, I see that a lot. You see guys that are like, well, I can't scout because I can only go there for 7 days to hunt. And it's like, well, you better spend some time while you're hunting, scouting. Then,
yeah,
you got to get on deer. You can't just go out there and just climb a tree and think you're going to be successful.
right.
But a lot of guys got that mindset, or they pick a couple spots on a map and they don't do like we're talking, where it's a rough starting idea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They go out there and they depend on that.
Yeah.
And that's bad. And when you get beyond that, the whole time you guys were talking, I was thinking about this, is the psyche of hunters.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny the way they think when they go on a trip like that. I do my best when I'm alone.
Yep.
I concentrate. I spend the whole time scouting, hunting and stuff. And when I go with somebody, I'm always distracted and I'm worried about that other person and how he's going to do. And, worrying if he ate right or whatever. I mean, I don't know what's wrong with me, but that's the way it gets, but
right.
I go, I shouldn't have compassion.
Right.
But,
yeah. I think the moral of the story there is Dan went soft on it. No, I'm just kidding.
right. So when you look at other people, I see a lot of people who like can't handle going alone. They break down.
Yeah.
They end up leaving early. They don't know what to do with themselves. I mean, I get friends and stuff that who obviously I won't name, but I mean, get like, hey, can you come hunt with me? I want to go do this hunt. Can you come with me?
Right.
It's like, dude, why don't you just go out there and do it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to hunt or you want to hold hands and eat marshmallows in the fire? It's for me, hunting is hunting.
Right.
And a lot of people can't get over that alone time. And I think that's the greatest thing about hunting. That's when you put your whole life's perspectives in order and all that. I mean, it's life's so hectic when you're not hunting.
Yeah.
Just getting some alone time to me is awesome.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people can't handle that.
No,
they have to have somebody go with them.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, man. Like, that was one of
me too.
My favorite things about this past year going to Iowa was it was completely solo. Like, I had a buddy who lived there, but he lived 30 minutes from where I was staying and hunting. So I think I went over twice and like had dinner with he and his family or whatever, you know what I mean? Just, but it was over the course of whatever it was, 15 days or whatever. But, he would call me just about every day and be like, hey, man, why don't you come over and have dinner? And I'd be like, oh, man, I'm locked in. You know what I mean? Like, I'm cool. I'm going to eat and I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to get up and do it again tomorrow. And it was like, I learned a ton in that trip because I just focused on deer. You know what I mean? And then if you are going to go with a dude, one of, our mutual friends, Dan Chad Sylvester, like that's like one of the only guys, possibly the only guy that I'll actually go on a hunting trip with because he's as neurotic about it as I am. And he is as myopic about it when he gets singularly focused. We just grind, we get after it. There's no checking in on each other to see if we're okay. There's no like, are you tired or you want to get, there's none of that. Like we're there to sleep and like trade notes really at the end of the night. You know what I mean? Like when we get back, there's no, what time do you want to meet to eat tonight? It's like, I'll get back when I get back. You do you, I'll do me. And then if we have time, to talk when we both get back, then we'll trade some notes. If I see something that sparks, that caught my eye and I'm like, and I'm not going to hunt that tomorrow and you maybe haven't gotten on anything, I'll say, you might want to check this out. And he'll do the same for me. Yeah. But there's no obligation to like hold hands and eat marshmallows by the fire, as you say. You know what I mean? It's like we're there to get after it. And if nothing else, we're there like when one starts slipping, you're like, hey dude, you're slipping. Like get your shit together. Yeah. You know what I mean? So
that's exactly the point I was going to get into is that you really got to think about who you're taking with you before you
yeah.
pick a partner for a hunt.
Yeah.
I mean, that is very important if you want success. I mean, people hunt for different reasons. Some
Yeah.
people hunt to get away with their buddies.
For sure. Yeah.
But just because a guy is a good drinking buddy that you can go out and play pool with, and he's got your back if somebody jumps your ass,
Right.
doesn't mean he's the guy you want in camp with you when you're hunting.
Right. Right. Exactly. So I think we covered that one well enough. Dan, if you have time, we'll catch 2 more. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
I'm good.
So this fellow writes in and says, John, you okay too for another 2 questions or so?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Awesome. So this fellow writes in and says, do you guys think that most mature bucks in hill country avoid direct travel in certain topo features? For instance, a mature buck would skirt a bench or a saddle, whereas a young buck or doe might travel right in the middle of it. If so, how would you hunt these? What do you think, Dan?
I think that's all relative on pressure.
Mm-hmm.
They learn not to go to those spots.
Yep.
So if those benches are pressured, if they get hunted more than once or twice a year, those bucks learn that those are not good spots. I don't think that they understand and they reason enough to understand to avoid all benches or anything like that. I think they avoid spots where they've had problems.
Yeah.
So I do agree with them that they avoid those spots, but I think they're avoiding them for a reason.
Right.
They're probably getting over hunted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that doesn't take much. I mean, the property that I hunt with my buddy, the little tiny farm down the street is pressured all around. We have some permanent stands on there because there's very few trees, and there's a couple of really good funnels and some observation stands and stuff. And it's funny how you can watch from an observation stand, watch a good buck that's been out there for a few years walk through and avoid going past any tree stand, even though we only hunt them 3 times a year. They still know where they're at.
Yep.
And you'll watch them look up at the stand and kind of stick their head around to see if you're in it. And every time I kill a buck over there, most of the time it's from an aggressive move, moving to where they're at, not from a permanent stand.
Right. Yeah.
They figure out the spots where people hunt.
Yeah.
So yes, they're figuring out those benches, but I don't think they're figuring out because it's a bench. I don't think they know, I got to avoid benches.
Right.
Like we might know to avoid Walmart parking lots at 2 a.m. in South Milwaukee.
Right.
But I don't think deer get that. They just know that when they walk through that parking lot in South Milwaukee at 2 a.m, they got their ass kicked and their wallet stolen.
Right.
They're not going to go through there again.
Right. Exactly. No, I 100% agree with you, man. And like the one thing I would add based on like, where would you hunt? It's like, no, like I'm looking for a little education here, see if I'm thinking about things the right way, Dan, but I would look at what are those secondary terrain features around that would be the path of least resistance to get them wherever it is that you've determined that they're going. Right. And so if it's a food source, like, well, what is the option? What is the alternative to that? Like, where is that secondary terrain feature that is likely once pressure hits becomes the primary terrain feature? You know what I mean? Like that's the one thing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I would say that if that buck's going around a feature like a bench, like he's talking, it's probably not food related. It's probably doe related.
Right.
So he's probably doing one of 2 things. He's either going to the downwind side on the main trail that goes around to the downwind side, or he's going to the side that the does exit on, and he's smelling the doe trails, exit and entrance trails, to see if one's in heat. But there's going to be one side he tends to go to, and if it's rut related, there's going to be a rub line there. Even if it's old rubs or whatever, there'll be scars on trees. You'll be able to see where they travel and how to hunt it.
You answered my follow-up question because I was literally going to ask you. The next question was going to be, so would it be similar to how, and I'm just framing it and how I've like seen this before from my own experience is, so whenever they go into a food source, right? Like usually the trails that are perpendicular into the food source, a lot of times doe trails, right? The one that is running parallel to the food source, cutting all those trails going in, oftentimes is like a trail that a buck will use. And it may not be as apparent, right? Like those other ones are kind of beaten in, but it'll be subtle, but it will perpendicular all those doe trails. Is it similar the same way? So if you have like a bench that's running along a ridge and like it's going to get pressure, it's going to be a secondary trail.
He's centricking.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So if that's the case, I mean, you'll actually see that those rubs will actually be on the trails coming from the bench.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
But they're not really. They're on the faint trail that's crossing those trails. He's just marking that trail as he crosses it. So you'll see they're in line. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Sometimes you can't even see that faint trail because it's only used in rut a lot of time.
Yeah, no, I had that this year in Iowa. Like there was I had to pick up, it dawned on me probably like the 6th day. Like I finally figured out, like it was after I missed that one deer, because I couldn't figure out why he walked away from like the primary scrape area. And it was because there was a super subtle little trail that went down into this draw. And I didn't recognize it until I got down and looked, and I was like, I would have never thought that was a deer trail, just because around here hunting smaller kind of parcels, deer just beat, trails into the ground where it's obvious where they're moving. And out where I was at in Iowa was kind of a big wood setting to where it's like, man, deer trails out there were really, really faint. They weren't real obvious, you know what I mean? In a lot of places that I was at. And that was a learning moment for me, because I was like, oh, so this is actually a deer trail. You know what I mean? I was like, I would have never thought that. So then I started recognizing them as I was going. I could start to pick them out, but yeah, that's interesting, man. Like that, 100%, they're going to avoid that because of pressure. The other thing too, I want to ask you, this is off topic of maps and topo, but I was having this conversation about secondary rut activity, or secondary, scrapes rather, secondary scrapes and secondary scrape lines, or secondary primary scrapes, because, in high pressure areas, I've seen this, and I was actually talking to Zach about this at one point, and I'll find like a set of scrapes, say like as soon as they start laying them down, right? So just say mid-October for like a ballpark, right? And in PA, much like probably what you have in Wisconsin, like a ton of pressure on public, especially like those like more easy to access areas. And a lot of times see scrapes kind of laid down in those spots, and then they'll dry up and vanish, right? And then what I started to see was less activity, but that there were actually started to be secondary scrape lines that were set up further back into the timber once the pressure pushed them off those first scrapes that they laid down. Have you seen anything like that as well, where it's like almost like they lay down one set, it goes cold, the pressure comes in, they then move further back in closer to their bedding cover, and then they lay down. Now, I know bedding cover, you always want to try to find scrapes in those areas, but I've actually seen where they've laid them down, they've dried up, and then they've literally moved, whether it was 200, 300, 400 yards, whatever it was, back further into the cover. And then that would be the one that would stay open and be tended like through rut, through in kind of like into late rut, if you will. And have you ever seen anything like that?
So I haven't recognized that exact behavior, but I could see that happening, because I could see pressure moving the deer, and they're going to move the scrapes with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that it's like a plan or anything, but
right.
if you push them out of one area and they move into another, they're going to scrape there, and they usually don't move far.
Right.
So they might move from one transition to the next, which ain't far. It's just moving away from the people coming in there, right?
Yeah.
But the spots where those scrapes are all year is probably the better area all year anyways, because I think the mature bucks figure out that pattern, and the younger ones are the ones that keep kicked around and shift around,
Right. Yeah. It's usually those young deer a lot of times too that are getting surly early. They've not quite figured out when the game kicks off. And so they're, at least I've seen, on camera and stuff like that. Might be different in other places, but I've seen more frequently younger deer laying down the earlier sign. And then as it gets a little closer to prime time, it's whenever the big boys kind of step out and say, all right, young fellas, I'm glad you get all the girls riled up for me. I'm going to go ahead and take my pick now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but anything like that, John, for you, man, have you seen anything similar to that, or what's your experience been with kind of, watching how scrapes kind of shift and move around sometimes?
I don't really have a whole lot to comment on that. I just don't really know how they move around, because I only have one season of hunting on land that isn't the 90 acres I grew up hunting on.
Mm-hmm.
So I know where they all are on that property. So I'm not really sure yet.
Right. Okay. That's fair enough, man. We're all here to learn some stuff. It's I like to admit that
I feel like I've learned more this year than I have my entire hunting career.
Right. That's good, man. It's good. I expect to see some killer pictures this year.
So.
All right. So last question here, gents. We'll close it with this one. Let me see here. We'll try to pick a good one here. A couple of these we've already kind of covered. It's all right. So we'll end on this one. It says, what is the number one thing to look for on topo maps and mountain/steep/hill hill country. And then I think we can just take this for overall, Dan, we can maybe make this the closer and be like, what are we looking for in that setting? But overall, like, what are your kind of like top takeaways, like whenever people are thinking about reading maps?
For steep hill country?
Yeah, let's start with that one. What are we looking for in those scenarios?
We did kind of cover that. I think, that those leeward hills and the little tiny knobs sticking off, I think the little tiny knobs are better than the big points. And the thermal hubs again, and the stuff that's overlooked by the roads that's steep.
Right.
Yeah. We did kind of cover that one.
Yeah, we did actually. My bad. Let's we'll rewind that. Let's do this. Let's end on this one. So what's Dan Infalt's kind of like top 3 things if you're just kind of learning to read maps? Like, what are the things you would suggest? Like, hey, if you're brand new at this, and it's a lot to take in and it's a lot to like get good at reading them and stuff like that. If you were to tell someone like, hey, just focus on these 3 things.
I'll see if I can get through 3, but number 1 hits me right away is that when you go scouting or you go hunting and you go in a new area, when you get back, look at it, or even when you're in a tree, if you're there early or whatever, look at a map, an aerial, and look at how it lays out. See if you can determine or look before you go in and guess, but study those maps in between and correlate it with your hunting and scouting, so that you start to determine and get an eye for thick cover versus open cover versus mature trees. A lot of times you can tell by the looks of the trees whether they're mature or not, but it takes an eye. It takes, looking at them maps and looking at the terrain. It's not something like I can tell you how to do. But if you're actually looking at maps, going in there hunting and coming back out, and if you're asking a lot of questions about maps, you probably haven't mapped a lot and done that.
Right.
But you learn a lot by actually looking at what you've already scouted and saying, "Oh,
100%.
That's where I was. This is what I was doing." The second one is something we didn't cover, and I should have answered that with the last question you were trying to ask me.
It's all right. We'll do it now.
Tight lines on a topo map.
Yeah.
Where they come together tight. I mean, that's steep terrain. I mean, as long as it ain't a sheer drop off, the steeper the better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you want to look at the steeper stuff.
Right.
Okay.
And then number 3.
I don't know, maybe John has the third one.
John, you got the third one. What's the thing you look? What's the thing you look at, buddy?
Cut you off guard.
I look at the aspect a lot because around here we get the predominant west wind, so I'm looking for those west facing ridges. Initially when I'm just not scouting for the day, I guess it would depend on the wind. So I guess I should answer that in a different way.
No, that's fine. You can roll with that, man.
All right. So looking for the leeward sides, right?
Yeah, that's basically it. That'll be the first thing I'm looking for in hill country.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I kind of do the same thing. Like if I'm in hill country, I'll say the one thing that I do a lot now more than anything is a lot of the public that I'm hunting around where I'm at, there's not a lot of like, it's either flat or even the mountain stuff is so gradual that there's not any real distinct like terrain, kind of like topography changes, right? It's all pretty gradual. And so it makes it really hard from a topo perspective to say like, this is the good stuff. So I have to spend a lot of boots on the ground. But so what I spend a lot of time doing, is really looking for those hard transitions that are going to like create a definitive line. And those are the places that I'll go kind of look at immediately and then kind of move from there and follow the sign whenever I'm scouting to kind of figure out where I should be headed next, looking for clear cuts or any, like you were saying, Dan, like open spots in the timber or whatever. I've kind of honed in on those just because we have so much pressure around here that I need to find little places that other people aren't willing to walk into. And I've found like these clear cuts on top of these mountains oftentimes will have little swamps kind of built inside of them. And if I can figure out a way to get access into them, I can often find a secondary transition line inside of them on top of the mountain where I can find, bedding or at least, in their general bedding area. And that was actually a couple of places I've hung cameras, and actually one of them's a cell camera. And I literally set it up in the first night I had it there. I had two decent deer, 2 decent bucks come by in velvet. So, that's kind of like the thing that's kind of the thing that I'll look for is it's a little bit of both, right? It's a little bit of mountain and it's a little bit of swamp. So it's that, I'm looking at the topo and the terrain. I'm trying to get to the elevation, but then I'm also looking at what are those internal kind of secondary transition lines to look for where they might be spending a lot of time. And that's oftentimes where I found a lot of sign and where I have found like deadheads or, or old beds or whatever have been in those general areas. So that's kind of my takeaway. What's that, Dan? Go ahead.
I was going to say that when you're looking at those topos too, there's one thing we didn't mention on that hill map site. There's you can go to terrain, which is different from topo. It gives you like a 3D image of the shape of the land. And a lot of times you can see the hidden benches on that you can't see on the topo.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one thing. It's like
I use terrain maps a lot.
Yeah, I get fooled by benches a lot too, where it's like it doesn't look like enough of a bench, and then whenever I actually scout it, it's much more of a bench than it looked like on the map, or vice versa. But all right, gents.
They show up really well in that terrain. Feature.
Yeah, you can really see like the 3D kind of how it lays down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nice. Well, gents, that is a wrap for this next session of reading topo and maps. I appreciate you guys joining me. John, thanks for coming on and taking part. Dan, thanks as always for jumping on here. If anyone is not following the Hunting Beast, you should be following the Hunting Beast forum. You should be on their Facebook page, and you should be checking out Dan's site, waiting for his sticks and when the stand happens to come out. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a subscribe there as well. I'll be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Gumleaf USA Boots. And until next time, we'll see y'all.